The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the SSAB. Glad you're all here. Looks like we've got a full house. Couple of housekeeping comments. Please turn off all of your electronic communication devices, cell phones, beepers, iPads, fax machines, anything else that may interrupt the meeting. We do have 2 emergency exits or exits leaving the building. One is off to my right and another one back to my left. If you require any assistance, the staff or some of the board members will be happy to assist you. Please use the microphones when speaking. And that way all of our comments can be captured for posterity and for the television viewing audience. When making a comment or asking a question, please place your name tag in a horizontal position or vertical position so it can be seen, and the order of placement will be the order of speaking. During the presentation during our presentation, the question and answer period, we'd like to hold that till after the end of the presentation, and we will take questions from the board first and then from the public who wishes to ask any questions about the presentation. Okay? Our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 9th at 6 o'clock here in this room, and the presentation will be on groundwater strategy development effort. Dr. Dan Good, who's been working with the DOE and Oak Ridge, will discuss the results of the recent groundwater strategy development. I believe that's been going on for a little over a year now. Okay. Comments from the DDFO, the Deputy Designated Federal Officer. Ms. Cange?
Good evening. How are you?
And you also have some new members to introduce, too.
I certainly do. I'm very happy to do that first and foremost. I have 4 new members to introduce, to welcome and introduce, and I understand 3 of the 4 are here. So we'll start with those. First is Mr. Noel Berry. Raise your hand. Welcome, Noel. Just a little bit about Noel. He's a resident of Knoxville and is a retired project management professional with extensive experience in computers and related quality assurance issues. Noel's worked as a senior laboratory specialist and quality assurance build programmer for IBM and as a quality assurance engineer contracted to Siemens USA. He received his AS in Electrical Engineering Technology from Chattanooga State Technical Institute and his BS in Computer Science from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. So welcome, Noel, and thank you for your willingness to serve on the board. Next we have Mary Hatcher. There's Miss Mary. Mary is a student at Pellissippi Technical Community College in Knoxville, where she's working towards an AS in paralegal services. Until 2006, Mary was the owner of a metal finishing and detailing business in Marshfield, Missouri. Mary lives in Louisville. Welcome, Mary. And Miss Wanda Smith. Welcome, Wanda. Wanda lives in Rockwood and is the owner of a convenience store in Pine Orchard. She's a graduate of Harriman High School and is a former member of Head Start, the Morgan County Industrial Board, and the Morgan County Civil Service Board. Wanda is a former vice president of the Morgan County Democratic Women's Club and the former co-chair of the Morgan County Airport Planning Commission. So welcome. Also, Carmen DeLong is our fourth new member, and she was unable to be with us tonight. I'm happy to read a little bit about Carmen if you'd like, or I can wait until she's here. Any preference?
Wait.
Okay.
Let's wait till she's here.
Okay. So thank you again to the new members for agreeing to volunteer and serve on the board. It is certainly appreciated by DOE and I think also your fellow board members. So we'll go with that. In terms of just a few updates on things, as I'm sure all of you know, for the federal government, the fiscal year ends on September 30th. And so this is a very busy time of year for us as we close our books on fiscal year 13 and look forward and participate in our planning for fiscal year 14. We do not yet have an appropriations bill, so we don't know what our funding will be for fiscal year 14. This is not an uncommon practice. Typically, we do not get an appropriations bill until sometime after the start of the fiscal year. So what occurs is that we are put under what's called a continuing resolution, or a CR, and we are given guidelines on what our spending can be while the CR is in place, and it's usually based on the former year's budget or some level of the former year's budget, and it's generally very conservative to ensure that we don't overspend before we have an appropriation bill. So we don't have the guidelines yet on what the continuing resolution will entail, but we are doing our planning activities, getting ready for it the best way that we know how. On the project side, I just want to mention we've had a significant milestone this week for the K-25 project. That's the demolition of the former K-25 gaseous diffusion building at the East Tennessee Technology Park. As many of you know, we have been working on demolition of that building for the past several years, and all that remains are the last 6 units of the building. The building originally had 54 units. These last units have taken some extra preparatory work because they are contaminated, or some of the units are contaminated with technetium-99. And so we have determined that the building is crit incredible, and we have declared that the building is demo ready, and we will begin demolition at the start of next week. So that's a huge milestone for us. We do anticipate having the building on the ground and the project completed in about a year's time. So that includes not just taking the building down, but disposing of all the waste permanently and doing all of the other ancillary things that need to be done to complete the project. So we're getting very close, and we're very, very excited about that. I understand last time there might have been a question about the status of our plans for the direct disposition of the U-233 material from the Oak Ridge National Lab. Some of you may have read in the paper that the department has been engaged in conversations with the state of Nevada and with the governor in order to allow the start of that disposition activity to begin. There were several meetings last month. Mr. Dave Huizinga, the head of the Environmental Management Organization at DOE headquarters, and our boss, Mark Whitney, the manager for the Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management, spent a few days in Nevada with various people, and there are some follow-on discussions, but we do not yet have the go-ahead to start those shipments. We hope to work things out and have that sometime in the near term. So that's as much as I can say at this point regarding that project. And that's it with regard to a quick summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cage. Are there any questions? Mr. Bell?
Could you remind us how complete that project would be, the 233
The
project?
U-233, sure.
Yeah.
So when the project was was reevaluated back in 2011, the proposed path forward was to disposition about 50% of the inventory directly without any need for down blending. And so the material that is left for disposition, once all that work is accomplished, we would have about 50% of the inventory out of the building and permanently dispositioned to its final place. That would leave about 50% of the inventory where we would have to down blend it and then disposition afterwards.
Thank you.
Sure.
Down blending, we have some new members, maybe that would just, one definition, what that means exactly.
Right. So I guess in its simplest term, this material, because of its current form or state, cannot be permanently disposed of without rendering it less hazardous. And so it will be rendered into a less hazardous state that can then be permanently disposed of safely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments from Mr. Adler?
Excuse me. I don't have anything to add this week.
All right. Connie Jones, can you hear us on your radio connect or telephone connection?
Yes, I can. I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate Sue talking about the efforts going forward with K-25, and that's a major milestone, and we're looking forward to working on K-27 soon.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Owsley?
Thank you, Dave. I've been chided a couple of times about my failure to speak up at these meetings, and I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself to the newer members. Some of you have been here a while, know that I've been here a while, and know that I hesitate to speak up, but I don't hesitate to answer questions. So I encourage questions, and in an effort to identify the areas where I work that may be of interest to you, I thought I would just give you a few minutes of what we do in the Division of, Department of Energy Oversight Office. We are an office within the TDEC Division of Remediation. That is the Superfund division, the division that does Superfund cleanup across the state. And the Oak Ridge Reservation was placed on the national priorities list in the early 90s, late 89, I believe. And there was a federal facilities agreement that stipulates how the three parties work together to implement that cleanup activities, and our office is responsible for TDEC's portion of that. We're also responsible for environmental monitoring on and off of the reservation. We focus on exit pathways as well as off-site media, soil, groundwater, surface water, and sediment. We also have an emergency response responsibility for any action on the reservation that results in an emergency that crosses the fence. We are not responsible for anything that's on DOE side of the fence during an emergency, but if it crosses the fence, then the state of Tennessee and local governments become involved, and those preparations are planned and practiced on an annual basis. We also have a public outreach effort. The department provides a small grant to local governments to participate in DOE activities that impact them, and we provide annual status reports on our general activity as well as our environmental monitoring activities. So if you have any questions on any one of those areas, I would encourage you to ask. I will make an effort to speak up, but I promise that every year, and I don't really make that. So again, I encourage you to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Owsley. And if you have anything that's very pertinent to what we're discussing, your comments are greatly welcomed, as Ms. Jones's are also. Okay, thank you. Ms. Staley?
I would just like to ask John a question, if I could.
He's over there.
Is there anything that is like a priority right now that's current, that you're working on, that we might be interested in?
A priority, we did share our priorities with the board, and they are focused primarily on mercury remediation at the Y-12 facility. There are a number of circular actions that are planned, and we would appreciate this board's input in that. We also have some off-site groundwater issues that we're working with the Department of Energy and EPA on. The groundwater strategy, would appreciate this board's involvement in that activity. We are also working closely with the Department of Energy and EPA in the development of a second on-site circular disposal facility, which we would again ask the board's involvement in.
Are there any other questions? Okay. We'll move on to the public comment period. Ms. Riley, if you would, please.
The public comment period is now open. Are there any other members of the public who want to comment? Right. As a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Our presentation tonight is on the long-term stewardship for the Oak Ridge Reservation. I want to make just a brief comment on this. Before I got involved with the board, Ms. Siegel gave this presentation to the board. I'm thinking it's probably about 3 years ago. It is presently being shown on the public TV outlets because we did not have a formal meeting in August, and it is an absolutely super presentation. I'll ask the vice chair if he would introduce our presenter tonight. Tonight's meeting presentation will focus on long-term stewardship in the Oak Ridge Reservation. Presenter is Dr. Lorraine Siegel. Lorraine is an ecologist botanist who is retired from the Oak Ridge National Lab in '95. Her area of expertise included air pollution effects on vegetation and application of the National Environmental Policy Act. Lorraine graduated from Stanford University with a BA in art and was a scientific illustrator for 10 years. Subsequently, she received an MA from San Francisco State University and a PhD from Arizona State University in botany ecology. Since retiring, Lorraine has served on the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Board, the Oak Ridge End Use Working Group, the originator of this organization. She served and still is active on our stewardship committee. She's a past president of the Oak Ridge Art Center at Board of Directors and a native, or not, a very influential resident of Oak Ridge. Dr. Siegel, your presentation, please.
Thank you. I guess I should stand up. Yes, it's been 17 years since we first started talking about long-term stewardship. And so it's hard to know, where to start this presentation, where to end it, and how much to include in it. The answer in the limited amount of time is really not much can be said. So I would like to urge you to pick up a copy of this student summary of the stakeholder report on stewardship. It's wonderfully complete and well written. It was published in 2004, and when I read through it the other day, I was just overwhelmed. And so for fill-ins, information of the things I might touch on tonight, this will be a wonderful reference for you. It summarizes those other documents, the stewardship reports, and those documents are available also. And then I think Spencer passed out the web addresses for the documents in case you don't want hard copy. Yeah, I think you all have that. But do pick up one of these, and it's an easy read, and it will give you a good understanding of long-term stewardship. Well, you'll have to forgive me. There was a time when I could do this off the top of my head, but I can't anymore. So I am going to be using my notes, but I'll try not to make it too onerous. Does this work, Spencer? Oh, it works. How nice. I thought we might start with a map of the reservation as an introduction. The red areas, of course, are the contaminated areas, and the blue area up there in the corner is the watershed that surrounds ETTP. And then you see the Bear Creek Valley watershed in bright yellow, the East Fork Poplar Creek watershed, the Bethel Valley watershed in light yellow, and then below that, the Melton Valley watershed. Now, the contamination is mostly surrounding the major facilities in each of those watersheds. And as you may notice, that green boundary is the city limits of Oak Ridge, and most of the reservation is within the city limits of Oak Ridge. Also, you probably can see that most of the reservation is not contaminated. Of about 34,000 acres, less than 10% is contaminated. And most of the contamination is on site. There is the carbon tetrachloride plume that comes out of Y12 and goes into Union Valley. There's, of course, the mercury in the floodplain and the sediments of East Fork Poplar Creek. And there's radioactive cesium and strontium and tritium in the Clinch River. Stewardship is in place. It's not the reservation is not completely without stewardship. I don't want to give you that idea. There are deed restrictions, and if there are any changes in surface or groundwater use in Union Valley, the owners of that property have to notify DOE of any changes. There's signage along East Fork Poplar Creek. That is, if the signage has not been torn down by vandals or whatever. And of course, there is the White Oak Creek Dam, which limits the amount of contaminant release to the Clinch River. We also know that DOE continues to release low level of contaminants, but these are under permits, and they're granted by the state. However, really, when you think about it, Oak Ridge is really probably one of the safest communities in the United States. We're well monitored. The contaminated areas are well maintained, and there is state-of-the-art surveillance and emergency response available. So I've lived here for 34 years now, and I'm quite comfortable living here. I hope all the rest of you are too, who live in town. Turning now to a timeline of stewardship activities. The SSAB was established in 1995. I think it was sort of towards the end of 1995, as I remember. And in 1996, the state and EPA told DOE that it had to include, there had to be more public involvement in EM cleanup, and also in end-use decisions for the contaminated areas on the reservation. And so DOE came to the SSAB, which was a new organization at that time, mind you, and we were struggling with bylaws and budgets and what kinds of committees we were going to have. And we were just getting organized, so to speak. But DOE came to us and asked us if we would consider having a public meeting of citizens and to talk to them about end uses on the reservation and ask for public involvement in the environmental management program. And so we advertised a public meeting, and there were about 100 people there. I think it was in the cafeteria at Robertsville, but anyway, of those 100 people, about 30 of them decided they were going to be part of this effort, of this public involvement in DOE activities. And so we convened the End Use Working Group. And as we struggled with the issues related to the end uses of the contaminated areas on the reservation, we realized as a group that the contamination wasn't going to go away, that cleanup was not really cleanup. And so we couldn't agree to leaving the contamination on the reservation unless plans for a long-term stewardship program in place. And so the End Use Working Group convened the Stewardship Committee. And both of those groups met bi-weekly, mind you. And there was some duplication of people on those groups, but a lot of the people who were interested in end uses were not necessarily interested in long-term stewardship. But regardless, there were committee meetings, there were steering group meetings, and really for a while there, for about a year and a half, we all felt that we had full-time jobs. However, we were not paid, of course, but we did work very hard. The End Use Working Group published their report in July of 1998, and the Stewardship Committee, the first volume, was also published at that time. And then the End Use Working Group and the Stewardship Committee were disbanded. But we knew at that time that more work was needed. And so a Stewardship Working Group was formed in 1999. And we looked at long-term stewardship in CERCLA documents, and we were looking at how to involve the community in these efforts. And we were worried about information retention and availability, and also about funding. Well, we wrestled with those issues and published another volume on long-term stewardship in December of '99. Also that year, we convened a national long-term stewardship workshop here in Oak Ridge, and there were about 100 people who came from all over the United States. About half of that group were from the other 9 SSABs. And then there were headquarters people and TDEC people and local DOE people, EPA people, and interested local groups. And it was a lively situation. We did come up, believe it or not, with some recommendations that were sent as a body and from the assembled SSABs to headquarters. And then finally, when the Stewardship Working Group was disbanded in 2000, the SSAB formed a standing stewardship committee, and that's the committee that right now, of course, is being merged with the Environmental Management Committee. But something else important happened in 2001. We convinced DOE that they had to establish the Stewardship Committee as a de facto citizens board for stewardship, so that when EM was finished, or when the SSAB was disbanded, that there would be a citizens group who would continue to have oversight of long-term stewardship on the reservation. And it would be formalized once the SSAB was disbanded. It's very important that that commitment, which you will find in the public involvement plan, that it remains in the public involvement plan, because the PIP is an FFA document, and therefore it's legally defensible. So if there are questions down the road, we have a way to hold DOE's feet to the fire with regard to long-term stewardship. Well, this is a pretty impressive bunch of things that have happened for those first years, but it really could not have happened if we didn't have dedicated members of the community working often night and day. And then we had the cooperation and the support of the local DOE people, and I can't say enough about that. The environmental management program just provided us with everything that we thought we needed in order to make end-use decisions, in order to develop a long-term stewardship program. And there was the participation of the TDEC as well. So a lot of people were involved, and it was exciting. It was very exciting. Things have quieted down a lot since then, but that doesn't mean that the responsibilities for oversight and the fact that we need long-term stewardship is important. At that time, it seemed to be more important because the finishing times for the environmental management program activities on the reservation were a lot closer to now than they are now, when they're way out there in the future someplace. But anyway, moving on. This is our definition of stewardship. Now, because the word stewardship means so many different things to so many different people, that we had to come up with a definition that applied to remediation on the reservation. And we had to reach consensus on this definition. And that took a while. But, well, for instance, imagine if this group were the ones who were trying to come up with a definition of stewardship in relation to environmental management, to remediation. Imagine just what that would mean when each of you has a different view of what it means. So we did reach consensus, and it seems to have stood the test of time because it continues to guide our stewardship efforts. The next thing on the agenda was we had to work out some goals for long-term stewardship. And first we had to identify what we figured were the essential elements of effective stewardship, and I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide. And then we wanted to develop long-term stewardship requirements, and we wanted to identify options and promote the acquisition of adequate long-term funding for stewardship. Now the second two goals we decided had to be legally described, must be described in legally defensible documents. And that meant that we had to see it in the CERCLA records of decision. Funding is still a problem. It's not satisfactory for long-term stewardship. Annual appropriations really just don't do it. It has to be more stable funding and funding that's not subject to the whims of Congress. Things that have been mentioned have been trust funds, entitlements. There are a couple of other things that have come up. Nothing has really ever been decided on how to fund long-term stewardship. However, here in Oak Ridge, we do have a unique arrangement between DOE and the state, whereby the state and DOE signed a consent order for a pooled investment fund of $14 million to take care of maintenance and monitoring and whatever the environmental management waste cell in Bear Creek Valley requires once it's completed. DOE puts $1 million a year into this fund. And it's my understanding that if a new waste cell is built, that a similar arrangement will be made for long-term stewardship of the next waste cell. We also wanted to promote public understanding of stewardship. We felt it was very important that the community and people in the region understood just what the issues were. The fact that the contamination isn't going away, that there's going to have to be people to take care of it, money to take care of it, oversight. And then we wanted to promote interaction between the individuals and the governments. Well, the state and DOE are bound by law to include public involvement. And as long as the public has a good understanding of the issues, there's recourse for long-term stewardship. The local government seems to have its head in the sand with regard to contamination on the reservation and stewardship for the contamination over the long term. They have told us, when we questioned them about it, that if they're to have a role in long-term stewardship or cleanup on the reservation, that DOE is going to have to provide the funding for whatever that role is. So the city really hasn't played a part. Early on, we gave presentations all over. We gave presentations to local groups. We gave presentation to a working group of the City Council. We gave presentations across the country to other SSABs, and I even was invited to talk about stewardship at a multi-agency meeting for environmental management at the Academy of Sciences in DC. It was interesting because, you know, we have the hazardous waste and the radioactive elements, but think about the Air Force, okay? They have pools of jet fuel under their facilities, and they've got to worry about that. Or think about the Army, which has unexploded ordnance in many places across the country, particularly in Chesapeake Bay, I understand. So anyway, other agencies have similar problems, and this workshop was an effort for agencies to get together and talk about, you know, what needs to be done about managing contamination and long-term stewardship. Okay, we had finally to, not finally, but we had to consider what we thought were the elements of stewardship. If you remember, CERCLA was codified in 1980, and at that time, EPA assumed that cleanup of these contaminated sites around the United States was going to be cleanup, and that was that. However, it wasn't long before or after CERCLA was implemented that the feds and other government agencies realized that cleanup was not really cleanup, and that much of the contamination was going to remain on site. The problem was, because EPA was so thought that the cleanup was going to be permanent, there were no arrangements or nothing in CERCLA that talked about long-term stewardship. And of course, that was one of our main concerns, and that's why we insisted, and we continue to insist, that DOE has to consider long-term stewardship at the same time that they're considering the various options for remediation, which means early in the CERCLA process, which is with the RIFS. And that has to be carried through, of course, the proposed plans, and then into the RODS, which means that whatever is said there is legally defensible. Well, the goal is long-term protection of human health and the environment. And so to get there, we decided the authority and the funding was sort of at the top of this pyramid. And of course, the federal government is fiscally, under CERCLA, is fiscally and legally responsible for remediation, and also for long-term stewardship, as long as it's included in the CERCLA RODS. Funding, well, that's a problem. I've already mentioned that. That's not been solved. But under CERCLA, the federal government is also responsible for funding of the cleanup. The next box is the stewards. The principal steward, of course, is the federal entity. And in our case, of course, it's the Department of Energy. The implementation stewards are those that are responsible for the operations of stewardship. And that generally means the contractors that DOE employs to carry out these operations of stewardship. Oversight is under EPA and TDEC, and should be the county and the city, but that's not quite where it should be. The Site-Specific Advisory Board and any other organizations that care to take a role in oversight of what goes on the reservation. The operations are pretty clear-cut. There's the monitoring, there's the maintenance of any kind of remediation, there's the surveillance, which means that regulatory oversight of remediation. And there's reevaluation, because you have to look at the effectiveness of the systems and also the continuing need for whatever has been put in place. Public participation, again, a very important part of long-term stewardship and of cleanup on the reservation. There need to be meetings and information and documents, and the public is included in the EPA requirement for 5-year review. DOE has invited stakeholders to be part of that field exercise, and it's important that you all understand that you can play a role in that 5-year review. And of course, there's the enforcement element of all of these various operations. Institutional controls, they are controls that limit development or restrict access. They're permits, ordinances, legally binding provisions. The physical controls are, of course, those that don't allow access, such as there are barriers and buffer zones and and signs and guards and all of the things that protect the contaminated areas on the reservation. The information systems are very important. You've got to know what the waste is, and in the past that's been part of the problem, because early on good records were not kept or they were destroyed inadvertently, and so sometimes in going out to clean up an area nobody had any clue as to what it was that they were dealing with. So waste information is very important, and property information is important. You know, where is the waste? These information systems need to be complete. They need to be available, and over time, you know, things change. So information is a big part of understanding what's on the reservation and what kind of long-term stewardship is needed. Of course, research is important too, because there are new technologies that come along. There are site changes and waste changes, and so there has to be an allowance for research with regard to stewardship. Well, that gives you sort of a quick outline of what we were looking at early on. Currently, we are merged with the Environmental Management Committee, and I think we're all satisfied with that merger, and we look forward to working together. Doesn't mean that stewardship people don't still have activities that are particular interest to them. One of them on the short term is tracking the recommendation for that DOE site transition document that you all said we could send on up to headquarters. And a thought has been going through our heads recently that because so many of the members of the SSAB are new members and perhaps don't have a really good understanding of what they're looking for in a CERCLA document with regard to stewardship, it might not be a bad idea for us to develop some guidance, not a checklist, but just some guidance for reviewers of the CERCLA documents with regard to long-term stewardship. And I mean a couple of pages. I don't mean a 50-page document. We have out on the front wall the Oak Ridge Reservation stewardship map, which shows where the contamination is, and there are accompanying reference pages. If you haven't looked at it, if you haven't looked at the reference sheets, I encourage you to do so. And it might not be a bad idea to have a presentation at some time from the people who are responsible for that map and for keeping it current. Then we also, of course, are going to implement the FY 2014 EM stewardship work plan. I think you have a copy of it. It looks as if there is going to be a lot of reviewing of documents this coming year, and we all need to get involved in that. We can't just not understand what's in those documents and what we hope to find in those documents. There are also continuing activities. As I mentioned before, we want to make sure that planning for long-term stewardship is concurrent with planning for remediation at the CERCLA RIFS stage. We want to ensure that life cycle costs are compared in CERCLA documents, and that there is provision for funding long-term stewardship over time. The review part of it, we need to review and comment on stewardship requirements, and we need to really take it seriously and do a good job. We need to track stewardship requirements and the implementation at the remediated sites, and at lands that are transferred or leased. And of course, we need to continue to review RER reports. And I mentioned the participation of stakeholders in the 5-year review. And then again, trying to involve local government and community leaders in long-term stewardship on the reservation. I really hope that some of you will join us in this newly created committee that we have. We need new ideas. Getting the public to participate is just probably one of the most frustrating parts of being a member of the SSAB or trying to get information out there. It seems that the only time the public is interested is when there's a crisis. And we don't have too many crises here on the reservation, and so people are kind of passive about what goes on the reservation and what the remediation and the long-term stewardship is. There are other issues that occur. This business of records disposition, it's important that we know where our records are, how long they're going to be there, what form they're in, and so forth. They have to be available to the public, and they have to be available on a long-term basis, because 30 years is the half-life of some of these contaminants. 300 years out is not too far to be thinking, and then there are those radioactive elements that, heavens, they're going to be hazardous forever, I guess. We want to make sure that that Oak Ridge Reservation stewardship map that's out there on the wall, that it's updated and that it's publicly available and that it's used. We need integration in the state parcel mapping system. We need oversight of DOE property records at the county clerk's office and make sure that they're available to people go in who are prospective owners or leasers of lands that have been released. I mentioned the Citizens Board for Stewardship statement in the public involvement plan. We need to track that commitment. Every 3 years when the PIP comes out or it comes to you for review, the first thing we do is find that statement, make sure that it's there in the form that we wanted. So we have to be aware of that. And then, of course, there are stewardship requirements on land that is transferred or leased, as of, for instance, that property in Union Valley. So that's everything that I have to say. It's probably more than you wanted to know, but I will be glad to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shagel. You're not off the hot seat yet. Our learned colleague from the University of Tennessee Geology Department, Dr. Hatcher, has a question for you.
Well, I'm always impressed when you get up to speak, Lorraine, at your corporate memory of things that go back and back that many of us don't know. Okay? But now that the stewardship and EM committees have been merged, how do you see the transition in long term, this is over many years in the future, the role of environmental management as it transitions into what you've been talking about, long-term stewardship?
Well, eventually, when remediation is complete, presumably environmental management will be disbanded. However, we hope that the CERCLA documents that are prepared during environmental management's reign, that those documents will be complete enough that the things that we're worried about, where's the waste, what is it, what's the long-term stewardship, that those things are spelled out in these CERCLA documents. So it's a long time away. I looked at that what is it? Is it Appendix J or Appendix E? The activities. And those activities go out. How many years now, David?
Into the 2040s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another 40.
Right. So it's a long way away, but that doesn't mean we don't have to try to get the things that we want to see after environmental management is finished into documents that are legally defensible. I don't know that I've answered your question.
Yes, you have, largely, but what I was asking also is, okay, what is the down the road role that environmental management would play in monitoring or in concert with stewardship?
Yeah.
And these two should go hand in hand, seems like to me.
You know, and they do. The stewards, the implementation stewards, are of course those stewards that are the contractors that do the work for the Department of Energy. And all of those stewards, the principal steward, the implementation steward, and the oversight stewards, they all have to work together. And that's, you know, I'm not sure I've answered your question.
Anybody else? I do have one comment when Dr. Siegel talked about, we're not the only waste generators. The military is probably just as bad as we are. I believe our land use management program, which is almost a live, real-time monitoring of cleanup and groundwater and whatnot, I think I've been led to believe that came from a naval program for monitoring some of their sites for aviation fuel leakage. Mm-hmm. So it's, we're not alone in this. And for you new members who aren't sure what CERCLA and RODS are, in the back of your package every month there is a list of definitions that you can refer to. After a while, these words that we use will become second nature to you, so I apologize to some of you new folks for the big words that we all don't understand yet.
That, if you take this home and you read through this, it describes the CERCLA process, and it really gives you a good understanding of CERCLA and what it means to remediation on the reservation. So I really encourage you to take one of these. You'll enjoy it. And just think, these are kids who took those documents and read them and sort of condensed it and put it into a form that was meaningful to them, but it's meaningful to all of us. So this is important. I'm really impressed.
And they are available on this table.
Right, and there are more if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel.
The Oak Ridge Reservation holds an important place in our nation's history, and it continues to play a vital role in national defense and modern scientific and computational research. But decades of work on the reservation dating back to World War II have left some parts of the reservation contaminated with radioactive or other hazardous waste. It's the job of the U.S. Department of Energy to clean up those residual hazards. DOE relies on citizen input on those cleanup operations. The Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board is the primary source of advice and recommendations to DOE on its environmental management program. The board offers advice on a wide range of activities, from safe, secure disposal of radioactive waste to long-term stewardship of areas with waste left in place. Be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. Call us for more information or visit our website.